Good evening, church family. We want to thank you for coming in and tuning in this evening. The Kansas Avenue Health Ministries team program supporting a healthy lifestyle. We're going to enjoy our program tonight, and we're going to start off with prayer. If you would bow your heads. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to share knowledge that's going to be helpful as we make decisions and choices. We thank you for Dr. CHIDI being willing to support us in this program. And we pray that you would be with us all through the things that we hear, be with us through the medical problems that we have, be with us in the lifestyle choices that we make. We want to be a witness for you and a testimony of what health can be. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, good evening, everyone. We have a special guest with us tonight, Dr. CHIDI NGWAB. We call him Dr. CHIDI. He said that's the easier name to pronounce. And his background is that he's a lifestyle physician. He's trained in surgery, general practice, lifestyle medicine. His passion is to improve and prevent chronic illnesses, including things like heart disease, cancer, hypertension, arthritis, etc. He's a founding member of the European Society of Lifestyle Medicine and has over 20 years experience as a national and international, as well as motivational speaker, including TED Talks on reversing disease. And we're going to welcome him now. And we appreciate the sacrifice he's made to be with us because he's doing this live from England, and it's very early in the morning over there.
Well, hello, and thank you for that introduction. And it is, of course, a pleasure to be back. Last time I was with you, we were talking about the underlying problems with COVID-19. What is the issue? And one of the things that we showed was that for those people who suffered severely with COVID-19, especially those people who died, over 99% of people had an underlying disease. So we spoke a little bit about COVID last time, but so why don't we deal with some of the underlying diseases this time? Because I'm sure you must appreciate that prevention is much better than cure. This is me, Dr. CHIDI. Some of my contact details, you can get those after as well. But really what I want to talk about are these lifestyle diseases. We call them lifestyle diseases because they have an impact, or your lifestyle has an impact on how they occur and how they develop and how they progress. But what I would like to do is start off with this picture. I don't know if any of you actually recognize where this is. This is actually the Tower of London. Most people who visit London, this used to be the most popular attraction in London. But this sea of red that you can see, that represents back in 2014, 880,000 ceramic poppies. Each one of those ceramic poppies represents one of the fallen soldiers that died in the First World War that came from Britain. Now, since last we met, you have had a transition of presidents. I'm not sure if you're happy or sad about that. I can probably guess. But during the First World War, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States. Didn't really want to get into the First World War, wanted to keep America out. But when America went in, the First World War rapidly finished. When it was all over, the Europeans, because it was a European war, with Woodrow Wilson said, why don't we come up with this thing called a League of Nations? This is kind of like the precursor to the UN. If we come up with a League of Nations, perhaps we will never go to war again. Woodrow Wilson thought this was a great idea. However, when he went back to America, the Americans said, no, leave that to the Europeans. Let's just keep America out of their affairs. We don't want to be part of the League of Nations. Well, Woodrow Wilson, being a clever guy, said, well, you know what? I think I'm going to convince the Americans that they should join. I'm going to take a tour around America and I'm going to convince every state that they should back this. Because if they don't back it, I think the Europeans are going to just punish the Germans. Well, sadly, Woodrow Wilson had a severe stroke. In fact, when he had the stroke, his wife ended up doing most of the work after that. So what happened? The Europeans didn't have America involved. The Europeans really punished Germany. In fact, they treated Germany like second-class citizens. So much so that after they had been punished so severely, this gentleman came along and said, you know what, Germany, we're not second-class citizens. We're actually going to rule Europe for at least 1,000 years. And I guess we know what happened. Well, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because when we talk about health, one person's health doesn't just affect that individual. One person's health affects the family, affects the community, can affect a nation, can even affect the world, just like Woodrow Wilson. Many people say to me often, you know, it's my body, it's my life, I can do whatever I want. But when you get sick, who pays the price? Who takes you to the hospital? It's your family, it's the people around you. So we are not islands, we are actually interconnected. We live, we breathe, we interact and depend on each other. So when we're looking after our health, we're not just looking after ourselves, we're also looking after others around us. So what I thought we'd do, let's just get on and think about some of these diseases. We're going to look at some of these diseases and how we can actually help to reverse, yes, I do mean reverse the disease. I'm sure many of you have heard of most of these diseases, but we don't hear an awful lot about how we can get rid of them completely. So I thought I'd start with probably my favorite, diabetes. Diabetes is close to my heart because my father had type 2 diabetes and he died way too early because of the complications of diabetes. You know, back in the UK where I am, we have about 3 million people. You know, a third of all adults in the UK are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And those numbers just keep going up and up and up. It's even worse in the United States. And it's not just a disease of extreme affluence anymore. It's not just the richest countries in the world, but also the developing and upcoming countries in terms of their economies. Nigeria, India has over 100 million type 2 diabetics. Yes, 100 million type 2 diabetics. There's a huge financial cost. In America, UK, Europe, it costs over now 10% of the healthcare budget goes on treating people with type 2 diabetes. Globally, we're approaching now $500 billion each year is spent on diabetes. Back in the UK and in many countries, I've been to the United States often, it's looking to bankrupt any financial or healthcare system if it continues in this trend. There's more than just the financial cost, obviously. There is a human cost. Pretty much half of the people who go blind, half of the people who lose limbs, half of the people who get kidney failure and kidney disease have it because of diabetes. Diabetes affects every cell in the body, so it affects every organ. It's often, we used to call it a sugar illness, which kind of sounds sweet, but it's actually a devastating disease, even though we can live with it, even though many people do live with it. But let me take you back to 1925 when a very clever doctor, H.B. Himsworth, said, well, I want to find out why are people getting type 2 diabetes. And what he did, he went around the world and he looked at the diets around the world and he came up with some graphs. And on this graph, you can see the The dark columns represent the amount of carbohydrates in the diet, whether it's Japan, Italy, Scotland, England, Holland, or the USA. And in the light columns, it represents the amount of fat in the diet. And that line that you see going through represents the incidence of type 2 diabetes. What you can see is that as carbohydrate in the diet increases, diabetes actually goes down. Now, this obviously doesn't make sense because we're all taught that the more carbohydrate you have, the greater your risk of diabetes. But obviously, not all carbohydrates are the same. For example, when you look at Japan, Japan has the lowest incidence of type 2 diabetes there. It has massive carbohydrate. Now, the question must be, what sort of carbohydrate are they consuming? Are they eating biscuits and cakes and chocolates and sweets? No. In Japan, they're eating lots of vegetables and fruits and whole grains. So the carbohydrates are not all the same. There are some good and there are some bad. Those sorts of carbohydrates actually protect you from type 2 diabetes. Come up to the USA on the other side, which has, you might say, fewer carbohydrates, but it's not so much the quantity, it's the quality. The quality of the carbohydrates that are eaten in the US are world famous, let's say, shall we? And they are not the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains. They're the more refined carbohydrates that we get in our packets that sit on those shelves for so long in our shops. I don't know if you're aware that there's a game in England. It's called Knock Down Ginger. I wonder if anybody's even heard of it. But Knock Down Ginger, just for those of you who don't know, is when I used to play it as a kid as well. You'd ring somebody's bell and you'd run away. You'd knock on their door and run away. And this kind of, to me, feels like how diabetes works in the body. You see, I would knock on the door and run away. I'm confessing to you guys. I know you guys can keep it to yourself. I'd knock on the door, run away. The person would come to the door. They'd see nobody there. They'd close the door, go back inside. Now, somebody like me, I would then go back and knock on the door. This was many years ago, folks, just in case you're wondering. I'd go back and knock on the door and then come back and try and answer the door and see there's nobody there. After the fourth or fifth time, nobody comes to the door. They're fed up and they know somebody's playing a game. That's kind of how our cells work with type 2 diabetes. You see, in order for sugar to get into the cell, it can't just get into the cell. It has to kind of go in after insulin has bound to the cell. In fact, it's knocked on the door, insulin binds to the cell, opens the gate, and then glucose can go in. But what happens after 30, 40 years of lots of insulin knocking on the door, because we've had our Coca-Cola, Big Macs, Mars bars, all that for 30, 40 years, eventually the cells say, look, I am not opening up to sugar anymore. I've had enough. And it doesn't matter how much you knock insulin, I'm not letting any more sugar in. At this point, we say that the cells are becoming insulin resistant. And when they become insulin resistant, that means the sugar can't get into the cell, so the cells start to die. And outside of the cell, there is a buildup of sugar, especially in your bloodstream, and that becomes very toxic. But that's kind of like the fundamental basis of what type 2 diabetes is. Now, it's all very well for somebody like me to say, well, obviously you then need to eat like the Japanese and eat your whole grains and your fruits and your vegetables. But you know what? Life is not like that all the time. And we are surrounded by lots of temptations. And one of the things I always recognize when I'm in the States is the amount of adverts for all of that fast, unhealthy food. So we're living in a society where all these signals are coming at us. How are we ever going to overcome them? Well, I have some help for you, and it's called, coincidentally, the Dr. CHIDI method. And the Dr. CHIDI method goes something like this. When you see that donut, and it's calling your name, and you don't want to have it because you know what it's going to do to you, the worst thing you can do is say, I must not eat the donut. Because if you say that, you're going to want it even more. That's how our bodies are designed. The more you try to resist something, the more you actually want it. So rather than say that, the best thing to do is to say, you know what, I'm going to eat the donut. I can relax about it. I'm going to eat the donut, but I'm going to eat it in half an hour. I'm going to eat it in half an hour. Most of us, even I, can wait half an hour. Whilst you're doing that, at the same time you eat something like an apple will release sugar slowly into your bloodstream, meaning there won't be such a high spike of sugar. After half an hour, you'll have enough sugar in your system from that apple to help you overcome any desire for a donut. Now, even though I can't see you, I can probably hear some of you thinking, well, you know, after half an hour, forget about the donut, forget about the apple, I'll still want the donut. Well, if that happens, you can do this again. You know, at the end of the day, you could have eaten 5 apples. Fair enough, that's good for you. Maybe once in a while you'll fall down and you'll have the donut, but you will eat fewer donuts, you'll consume fewer calories. So this is called the Dr. CHIDI method, and it's called the Dr. CHIDI method because it represents don't resist it, choose to have it, but delay it. Don't resist, choose to have, but delay. That's the Dr. CHIDI method. There you go, free of charge. Tell me how it works out next time those donuts are calling your name. I have to ask myself sometimes, why this Western diet, what is it about the Western diet? And the Western diet is obviously high in fat, sugar, salt, protein, and low in fiber, low in nutrients. In fact, many of us in the Western world, which is very wealthy compared to other parts of the world, even though we have as much as we want to consume, we can be so malnourished because there are few nutrients in our food that we eat. And this gentleman has a lot to answer for. I'm sure you all know him. Many of us still buy his products. And in case you don't remember, he is the inventor of McDonald's, or came up with McDonald's, or used the franchise of McDonald's. You know, by the time he died at the age of, I think it was 84, he must have donated over $1 billion to the Salvation Army. It was a very big and successful business. The thing is, I go to Africa quite a lot, especially in Nigeria. There are no McDonald's restaurants in Nigeria. But as I understand it, McDonald's is coming to Africa quite soon. And obviously when it does, we then start to think, oh, well, why am I putting on this weight? What is it? Is it my hormones? Is it my bones? What's going on? But it's about what we consume. Diabetes is almost inextricably linked to the amount of fat that we put on in our body. Even if we don't have that big subcutaneous fat, we have that visceral fat, the dangerous stuff inside. So I say, for things like this, we have to beware CCTV. In Britain, that stands for closed circuit TV. And in Britain, we have more closed circuit TV per population head than anywhere else in the world. But this is a different beware. The CCTV I'm talking about with regard to our health is beware the car, the couch, and the TV. All of these things can, if we let them, help us to put more weight on and to consume fewer calories. It's always nice being in California, because I see all sorts of shops that have drive-throughs where you don't even have to get out of your car. You got drive-through banks, drive-through supermarkets, drive-through restaurants. I've seen drive-through marriages and divorces. I mean, I think you can do everything just about in your car, but it means you're sitting all the time. The couch does exactly the same thing. When I was a kid watching TV, I would have to get up and change the channel on the TV. These days, you just have your remote. So you can just sit in front of the TV all day. And that's exactly what people do. Here's a little tip. You don't even have to join a gym. If you want to burn more calories, one of the ways to burn more calories is just to stand a little bit more. The research has told us that if you stand for 6 hours a day, rather than sitting for those 6 hours a day in the office or at home, by the end of the year, the number of extra calories you would have burnt would be the equivalent if you had run 25 marathons. That means a marathon every other week. I don't know any of us who do that, but just by standing for 6 hours a day, that is what is done. As I'm speaking to you, I'm standing. My desk upstairs, I have a standing desk. In my office, I have a standing desk. you're just burning calories whilst you work, you know, killing two birds with one stone. But let's get back to this diabetes. How do we reverse diabetes? That's what we really want to know. So here's just a general outline. This is not specific to you, and don't try and do this on your own. I would advise that you try to do this with a physician. But here's some general things that you can do, and this actually works. First thing you must do is eliminate all the simple sugars from your diet. Yeah, that means all the biscuits, cakes, chocolates, all the sugary drinks, including juices and definitely alcohol. Get rid of all of them. You know, in some of the shops these days, you see diabetic biscuits, diabetic ice creams. You need to try and avoid those too, because their problem is in their title. They make you diabetic. So try and avoid all of that stuff. And when it comes to drinks, yes, I do include juices. Avoid juices, absolutely. In fact, I have a hierarchy of drinks, because really the only drink we ever need to drink is water. Yeah, that's it. I mean, all the other animals in the world, that's what they drink, water, and they seem to be doing okay. But if you really want something else in it, I mean, something like a smoothie where the fruit and the vegetable is blended, but you still have all the fiber in, that's probably second down on the list. Below that, maybe you have your freshly squeezed juices at home, but they have loads of sugar in them, so you have to be careful. Below that are the other juices you can buy in the shops. Below that, other sweet drinks, fizzy drinks, alcohol, tea, coffee. But right at the bottom, in the place where you should never go, right at the bottom, are the drinks that you know of, the 0-calorie drinks, you know, the drinks with aspartame in them. And those are, first of all, they don't do the job they're supposed to do, which is to help you lose weight. More people gain weight when they're on those sorts of drinks than lose weight. And on top of that, even worse, they're actually toxic to the body. They can cause brain tumors, blood cancer, and all sorts of strokes, especially in young women. So we need to try and avoid them if that's at all possible. The next thing we need to do is cut out all of the white stuff. That is not a racist statement. I'm just talking about cutting out white rice, white bread, white pasta, white and potatoes, because if you're diabetic and you're eating white rice, it's like eating a spoonful of sugar every day. Well, every mouthful actually, because that sugar in the white rice disseminates into your system so quickly. So avoid that altogether. In fact, I say to many people, for the first 2 weeks, if you're looking to reverse diabetes, for the first 2 weeks, only eat beans, greens, and vegetables. People say to me, well, what about fruit? Beans, greens, and vegetables. Well, what about whole grains? Beans, greens, and vegetables. So what this does is to lower the amount of sugar circulating in your system. It means that you're producing less insulin. And if you're producing less insulin, there are fewer insulin molecules knocking on the door of your cells, and then your cells may start to wake up again and start to say, well, you know, we missed the old insulin. They become insulin sensitive again. That's kind of the whole purpose of it. The next thing we have to do is to try to limit yourself to 2 meals per day. And that allows you to fast overnight and to fast between the 2 meals. The more you can do that, again, the more insulin sensitive your cells become. After each of those meals, you go for a walk. Immediately after that, you go for a walk, because as you're walking, you're using these big muscles, the biggest muscles in your body. And one of the 2 tissue types in your body that do not need insulin to let sugar into them is muscle and brain. So as you're walking, any excess sugar in your system goes straight into those big muscles, lowering your blood sugar, lowering your need for insulin. So this is all part of the process. Many people say to me, yes, Dr. Chidi, I bought myself a dog so that I can go walking. Well, all I say is, if you do buy yourself a dog, make sure you walk with the dog. This obviously is only in America. But anyway, I mean, these gentlemen, they're going to a fitness place. No one can walk up the steps. They have to take the escalator up to the fitness place because obviously it's easier. Sometimes we have to get out of our habits of what we do. I mean, I remember in my old gym, there was a fight that broke out in the car park because somebody took that sweet parking spot right in front of the entrance. They're going to exercise in the gym, but nobody can walk through the car park to get to the gym. And these are some of the habits that we have, and these are some of the habits that we really need to try to avoid. Okay, so that's diabetes. What I want to now do is quickly jump on and let's have a little look at a disease that is familiar to many of us. And if I could start with this gentleman, he was the premier of China back in the late 1970s, but he was dying of liver cancer. But when he was dying of liver cancer, he decided to do something quite interesting. He said, look, I want to find out why people in China are dying from liver cancer or dying from any cancer. What he did a survey of the entire Chinese nation. The wonderful thing about living in a totalitarian state is that you cannot refuse when they come up with a questionnaire. Not good for freedom, but very good for science. And in science, they did the biggest study ever done on human health, and that would used over 880 million people. The number of the researchers were over 650,000. So this was a huge, huge study. And what did they find? They found that in adjacent areas, some people had very high rates of cancer and others had low rates of cancer. Same Chinese people, similar areas, nothing different in the air, nothing different in the water. They did see, though, that the wealthiest parts of China had the highest rates of cancer, and the poorest areas of China had the lowest rates of cancer. The high rates were just a bit like the West. I mean, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, sometimes 1 in 2 people would have cancer. In the very poor places, the numbers were so low that it was sometimes 1 in 100,000. It was so low, you could almost say there is no cancer in that area. So what did they find out? Well, this started the study called the China Study. Some of you may have heard about the China Study. The book, The China Study, is actually out there. And if I was to boil down some of its main conclusions, it is that the more animal protein and fat in the diet, especially milk protein, the greater the risk of cancer. That's right. The more fat in the diet, especially milk, the greater the risk of cancer. So animal fat was linked to cancer. Here's a little offshoot of the study. It's quite a big study because it's a population study that takes in many countries of the world. And you can see on the x-axis on the bottom, you've got animal fat intake increasing. On the y-axis, you have death rate from breast cancer. And you can see there is a correlation. There's a line that goes horizontally through, right the way down from Thailand, which has very low animal fat, very low breast cancer, up to New Zealand, which has very high animal fat and very high rates of breast cancer. This can be replicated with bowel cancer, prostate cancer. All the cancers are pretty much linked to this amount of animal fat in the diet. It's not the only factor, but it is an absolute big factor. And people ask me a lot about milk and say, well, how can milk be so disastrous for you? Well, I say to you, which animal drinks milk into adulthood, apart from us? There are none. In the wild, animals, they're weaned off their mother's breast and they move on. For us, we would never consider, as adults, going back to our mother's breast and sucking milk. We would never think of doing that. But really, in actual fact, we're doing it with another species. You know, we're drinking the milk of another species and we're drinking it into adulthood. There is a problem and there's a price to be paid in our bodies. And one of them, and there are many, but one of them is cancer. This lady, I'm sure many of you know, Angelina Jolie, famous actress. She went to her doctors years ago and they told her that she had the gene for breast cancer. Okay, the gene for breast cancer. That meant that she had a more than 90% risk of getting breast cancer. And there is a small percentage of women who have breast cancer who have the gene for breast cancer. So what she did was to have a mastectomy. We call it prophylactic mastectomy, whereby before she got the cancer, she had her breast removed. You can understand that. Better to have your breast removed than to get the cancer. But probably what her doctors didn't tell her is that this study had been done many years ago, and it showed that for women who have this mutated form of what we call the BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene, if they were born before 1940, their risk of getting breast cancer by the age of 50 was 24%. If they were born after 1940, the risk went up to 67%. And you ask, well, why? What's the significance of 1940? I guess 1940 demarcates the time of the Second World War, when there were rations. The eating habits were different because there was much less food. People were a lot poorer. You couldn't eat what you wanted to eat. In Britain, when you see the pictures of what Britain used to look like during the 1940s, it was a lot of poverty. The amount of sugar you could have in a whole month to feed your family, you could put in the palm of your hand. Today, you see children going to school with a big fun-sized Mars bar and coming home with another Mars bar and a Coca-Cola. We didn't have that sort of availability of sugar in those days. And that is why, without even knowing, without even doing this consciously, the risks of cancer were much lower. In fact, the risks of heart disease were much lower. The risks of diabetes were much lower. Everything was lower during the Second World War. We're not asking for another war to happen, but we may have to modify our ways of eating and drinking, and perhaps not consume so many calories, so many concentrated calories. And that can help us avoid diseases such as cancer. Okay. This is a woman I used to spend a lot of my time working with, and she's written a few books on cancer because when she was much younger, was diagnosed with breast cancer for the 5th time in the same breast, 5th time, had all the treatment that was available. Eventually they said to her, well, there's nothing we can do. You got about 3 months to live. Well, she's a professor. She went out, researched this. She came up against the China study, changed her diet, got rid of dairy, got rid of meat. And for her, lived another 33 years. Given 3 months, lived 33 years, wrote loads of books about it. She died only a couple of years ago from an unrelated cause. So this can be beaten. It is possible to beat cancer. But look, if you have a diagnosis, and I hear this a lot in our churches, many people say, well, I'm not going to go down the conventional route. I'm not going to have surgery. I'm not going to. Well, I have to say there's nobody who can guarantee that you will be able to reverse your disease. It's not like diabetes. What we often need to do is to have some of the conventional treatment matched with some of the lifestyle treatment that gives you the best possible chance. But it's something you're going to need to do with your doctor. It's not something you can just do on your own and decide, you know what, I'm just going to go my own way. Often people do not survive that way. Let me go on to, what about this? This is an interesting topic. Guard your heart. Many of us have seen this proverb in Proverbs 4:23, because it says, above all things, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Well, heart disease is obviously a huge killer in the Western world, the biggest killer. I mean, if you're going to die prematurely, 50% of us will die from heart disease. It's the biggest killer. It costs us over here probably about £20 billion every year. But what is heart disease? Heart disease is when this beautiful artery on the left is converted to the not so beautiful artery on the right. It's where the plaque builds up with cholesterol and fat and calcium, and it doesn't allow the blood to pass through quite so easily. Now, when I changed my direction in learning and I stopped being a surgeon, I came up with, I met this great Dr. Esselstyn Caldwell, who did some interesting experiments in the late 90s. This is one of them. He took 18 patients with severe heart disease, and he took them on board, and they had high cholesterol, they had chest pain, they had the 8 years previous, they had 49 cardiac events between the 18 patients. What does that cardiac events mean? Maybe they've had stroke, chest pain, even chest pain, even heart attack. Okay, so they had 49 of those events between them. What did he do? He changed their diet to a plant-based, whole grain, no saturated fat from meat or dairy products. The cholesterol levels halved within a couple of months. No drugs needed to lower the cholesterol, just change your diet, the cholesterol goes down. The 11 years after the experiment, there were no cardiac events between them. So 49 cardiac events for 8 years before. After they got onto the diet, no cardiac events. And even more miraculously, 70% actually show the reversal of heart disease. That is a big statement, because even today in medical schools, we are not teaching people that you can reverse heart disease. We teach people that if they have heart disease, they need to be on medication. When the medication fails, they need to have a heart bypass. I spent a year in Cambridge doing 3 heart bypasses every day. You know, I was being taught that by some of the best surgeons on the planet. Wonderful, wonderful people. But often, even within that year, I would see people who had an operation in January, and come August, they're coming for another operation because those arteries have furred up again. What we do the plumbing, but we don't give them any advice about what they should do with their lives. Even at a brilliant institution like Cambridge, we were just really going through the motions of medicine. We were not really preventing or reversing disease. And some people, when I said they showed reversal of disease, it looks like this. This is an angiogram, which means this is where we put dye into the artery so you can see how the arteries work in the heart. And you can see that before you have this narrowing, this constriction, that's where the cholesterol is built up. That's where the cholesterol is now blocking the blood flowing through freely. And after, you can see that that's totally open and it looks normal. Now, if I was back still doing surgery and I presented this to my colleagues, they would say, "That's fantastic, Chidi, that's a wonderful bypass, well done." But this is not a bypass. This is the same individual after they changed their diet. Now, I think these two angiograms are about 18 months apart. 18 months apart. It took 18 months to get there. So it takes a bit longer than doing the surgery. But I'm just going to ask you the question, which would you prefer? To have a doctor like me opening up your chest and fiddling with your arteries, or to go on a decent health plan and get your arteries opening naturally? I'm hoping you view the latter as the best prospect. Excellent. But when we think about heart disease, we have to think, well, what are some of the causes of heart disease? You know, one of the biggest causes is high blood pressure. And the question also comes, well, why do we get high blood pressure? Well, let's think about it. You go to the doctor, you say you've got high blood pressure, your doctor will say, well, it's what we call essential hypertension. Essential hypertension just means that the doctor doesn't know why you have high blood pressure. And sometimes as doctors, if we don't know something, we give it a fancy name and it just makes us sound a bit more intelligent. It actually exposes us. You know, you go to the doctor and you have back pain. Your doctor will say, well, you have a diagnosis of lumbago. Or lumbago is just Latin for back pain. It just sounds more intelligent. And this is one of these examples. Essential hypertension. It means we don't know what causes it. But they will be able to tell you what the risk factors are for high blood pressure. Family history of hypertension, if you're Afro-Caribbean, male or female after menopause, if you're obese, you're a diabetic, smoker, high salt in your diet, stress, or you don't do any exercise. Those are the risk factors. I think everybody would agree on that. I don't think you need to be a doctor to understand that the risk factors are actually the causes. Yeah, they are actually the causes. And you might start to think to yourself, well, some of them don't seem too fair because I can't really change them. If my family has a history of high blood pressure, does that mean I'm going to get high blood pressure? Well, no, it doesn't. There is not a gene for hypertension. The reason why we get high blood pressure because our family's got high blood pressure is because we match the habits of our families. Our eating habits, our exercise or non-exercise habits, and our stress habits, the way we deal with stress. All of those things come together to make sure that we get high blood pressure. So if we break the cycle, break the cycle of diet, break the cycle of exercise, and break the cycle of how we deal and process stress, oh, we can break the cycle of high blood pressure. Afro-Caribbean, my goodness me, why should Afro-Caribbeans, black people, suffer with high blood pressure more than anybody else? Is it because we've been oppressed? Is it because life isn't fair for us? It's not quite that. The reason why we have higher blood pressure, especially in the West, is because we are black. It's really part of how we're put together. You see, we originate from very hot countries. Those hot countries are hot to, you know, it's good for us, really. But in order that we don't incredibly, or in order that we don't dry out or dehydrate, we hold on to water slightly more than the average Caucasian, because if we didn't, we would sweat too much and dry out very quickly. So how do we hold on to water? We hold on to water by holding on to more salt. The more salt you have, more water will follow. Now that's okay if you're in the Caribbean or if you're in Africa and you have a basic, simple, healthy diet. You come to a country or a continent where you have high salt levels in the diet, well, you are going to be much more susceptible to bringing in much more salt into your system, and therefore bringing in much more water, therefore raising your blood pressure. That's the reason why we're more susceptible. So the only thing we need to do then is to lower the amount of salt, and the risks become exactly the same. Number 3, why do males have higher blood pressure than females? Well, I think that's easy enough to answer, and that is because males have to live with females. Just let you think about that. See, I'm thankful I'm here on my own. I don't have an audience. Nobody can attack me. But no, the main reason is that females are protected from high blood pressure by the estrogen in their system. And that estrogen starts to wane post-menopause, and then our risks become very similar. Okay, what can we do then about high blood pressure? Well, another gentleman I spent some time studying with was Dr. Dean Ornish of the University of California, San Francisco. And much of the research that came out showed us that it doesn't matter race, color, creed, sex, wherever you are, or age. The more fruit, vegetables, whole grains you have in your diet, the lower your blood pressure is going to be. It can lower your blood pressure. Even simple things like water can lower your blood pressure. How does that work? Well, think about it. Some of you may like swimming. Well, try and think about swimming in a lake filled with honey. You're trying to swim through honey. That's a difficult thing to do. It's very thick. It would take so much energy and effort to do that. Well, that's kind of how our blood becomes when we don't keep hydrated. So if your blood becomes thick, that means that your heart is going to have to do more work to push the blood around the system. If it does more work to push the blood around the system, that means your blood pressure has to go up. Your body knows how much pressure it needs. So even if I come along and give you a lovely antihypertensive drug and lower your blood pressure, that still may not be enough to get the blood around your system. So people are having strokes on low and normal blood pressure when they're on medication. Okay. Greens are incredibly important when it comes to blood pressure. In fact, the darker the green, the better. So kale, spinach, broccoli, etc. They're fantastic for you. What do? When you digest the greens, they get into your system. Those chlorophyll packets, they're in your system. What they do when they pass through your blood, they sensitize the interior of your arteries. And they ask those sensitive cells to release a chemical. That chemical is called nitric oxide. NO is the symbol, nitric oxide. It may not sound that interesting, but for some of you, you may understand that nitric oxide is the active ingredient of Viagra, or Cialis, you call it out there. That's right. Nitric oxide, which is released because of greens, gives you the same result as Viagra or Cialis. Okay. Now, before you go running off to the shops to get more greens, just come back a minute. Because people say to me all the time, Dr. Chidi, I don't really want to eat greens. I mean, that is rabbit food, man. I want to have man food. I don't want to eat rabbit food. Well, the one thing I can tell you about rabbits is that they do not need Viagra or Cialis. So that is something I will put you. So it opens up your arteries. Okay, the greens will open up your arteries. As they open up your arteries, your blood pressure is able to come down. What else can we say for blood pressure? Well, if you have blood pressure, certainly think about changing your diet, but definitely exercise. I say at least 60 minutes of walking every single day. Yeah, you don't get the Sabbath off. It's good to walk on the Sabbath. Jesus taught us that. But something you must remember is if you have high blood pressure, no intense exercise, no weight training or sprinting, this high intensity, high impact training. Wait for your blood pressure to come down before you do any of the strenuous exercises. Okay, because if you already have high blood pressure, if you then do intensive exercise, it can shoot your blood pressure into the danger zone whilst you're doing it. And that can create a stroke. And you really don't want to do that. So exercise is important. Diet is also important. But let me go back to where we started here. Go back to that proverb. Proverb 4, verse 23. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. I find this text to be an absolutely fascinating one. Medically, certainly fascinating, because it's telling us something about the heart, and it's telling us something about blood. It's saying that the issue that comes out of the heart gives life. There's a spring that comes out of the heart. It's an issue that comes out of the heart that gives life. That's so important because for millennia, physicians did not know what the purpose of blood was. They knew people bled to death. They could see people dying on battlefields, but they didn't know exactly what blood did. This text actually tells us, that the spring that comes out of the heart, the blood that comes out of the heart, gives life to the tissue. That's exactly what it does. We didn't know that until 1624, when not too far from where I live now in Maidstone, Kent, a doctor called William Harvey discovered what the function of blood was. But way back then, thousands of years before, we were told in the Bible. But I think it tells us something even deeper than that. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Well, that text is telling me that my issues don't come from my neighbor. They don't come from my spouse. They don't come from my boss or my children. My issues come from my own heart, my own response. Whatever is going on around me doesn't really have the power to create issues in my heart or worry in my heart. The only thing that causes these issues is derived from my own heart, from my own character. So perhaps I should stop looking at other people as the problem and start looking at myself as the possible solution. I mean, this happened to me very early on in my marriage. I think I was doing late shifts at the emergency department, and I said to my wife, this must be the first years, I said to her, look, you have this habit of leaving the light on every time you leave the room. And I would demonstrate how to turn the light on and how to turn it off, just in case you didn't know. It didn't go down too well. But no matter what I said, she would keep leaving the lights on. And sometimes it would cause me a little bit of stress, thinking, why doesn't she listen? Blah, blah, blah. There was one day I was coming back really late from work at the hospital. I think it was a 2 o'clock shift. I finished, and in the morning, walking down the hill, everything is pitch black, and all I could see is this beam of light coming out of our flat, our apartment. I could feel the stress building up in my own heart. But as I was approaching that door, I thought, you know what, I've been talking about it for so long, I'm going to stop talking. Let's just forget it. It's not working. I need to keep my own peace. I'd say within 2 days, the lights started to go off. And I didn't understand it. I said, well, I've been talking for so long, the lights don't go off. Now I'm talking, and now I stop talking, the lights go off. And she explained to me that probably what's been going on is that as I keep talking about it, I'm generating stress within myself, generating stress within her. And you're more likely to forget. Well, that was her excuse. So the problem actually wasn't with her. The problem was with me. When I was able to change my attitude, she was able to change naturally. Often we keep looking at other people as the cause of our stress, and it's not. This is a big issue. I mean, this issue can be dealt with over several series, but what we have to understand is that nobody has the ability to generate stress in our heart. It is our responsibility, the ability to respond to what is going on around us. Can I forgive? Can I let go? Can I try to understand my fellow man and put myself in their position? If we're able to do that, it can release so much bitterness, stress, and negative emotion that is actually holding us back. And whether it's cancer, heart disease, diabetes, whatever, some of these things are holding us back and keeping us captive in those conditions. We have to learn to let go, because if we can let go, we can then be the sort of person that God wants us to be.
เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุดไทยประกันชีวิต
Very good, very good. So, this, I mean, that was just an insurance advert, as you can see, but it does actually demonstrate what is possible. There's lots of studies been done about the natures of people and how they are affected by disease. So, for example, people who are not able to forgive, people who are always holding on to the past, can't let go, can't understand. They always have higher blood pressure, heart disease rates, cancer rates than everybody else. People who feel bitter towards other people feel they are more susceptible to these diseases. But those of us who are able to give and not expect back, are able to lend, even though we've been conned and cheated, and people look to us as they were when mugs. We call them mugs in England. Walkovers, pushovers. Internally, we are more at peace. We who understand that God is actually in control. Well, you know what? If He's in control, I don't have to worry. This person who may have cheated me, I don't need to worry about them. I know God's going to pay me back. There is a beautiful text in Joel 2:25 that says, I will restore the years that the locust has eaten. Locusts don't pay you back. Locusts don't come and give you your crops back. But God says He will restore the years. So in other words, even the time we spent isn't wasted in that relationship, in that job. Whatever we've done, God is able to restore us if we can trust Him. Well, I've given you a few tips on how to reverse certain diseases. I hope you found that useful. These are my contact details if you need to get in touch with me, but I'm going to open it up for questions right now.
Dr. Chidi, we had some questions from our audience. Normally our closing time is 8 o'clock, but if it's okay with you, we'll go a little bit past that and address some questions from the audience, as well as I had a few questions. Janine Titus asked, what about almond and soy milk? Is that okay?
All plant milks are fantastic. Whichever one works with you, brilliant. Just try and avoid any animal milk, but plant milks are perfect.
All right. And Melanie asked, what about good fats such as nuts, coconut oil, and avocado?
Yeah. So oils. I mean, oil is pure fat. What you have to remember is oil is pure fat, but there are hierarchies of fats, right? So you have monosaturated, saturated, and then you have the trans fats. So you got a squeaky chair there, Doctor.
Yes, I realize that. I'm trying to not have that big noise. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But so, for example, coconut oil is a good one because coconut oil is a plant-based, saturated, short-chain fat. You know what? It's actually quite good for us in short measure because those short-chain saturated fats are good fuel and energy for the brain. So all I would say, though, is whatever fats you use, try to use them sparingly. Try and avoid saturated fat, which is animal fat. But the worst possible fat are the trans fats. I think in California, I think trans fats are banned throughout California, and that's a very good move. They're the fats that really cause cancer and heart disease at such high rates.
Ty Ogan made a comment that said, blood is life. I think he's referring to the Old Testament verse that says the life is in the blood.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Also from Ty, we had a comment regarding the 2 meals per day working. And I understand that it's better to have a 16-hour, 14 to 16-hour period of rest from eating, which is the intermittent fasting type of program. Do you have any comments or thoughts about that?
Yes. There are different regimes for fasting. The one thing we can say is, to be honest, if you were to sum up the totality of most nutritional advice, everybody would agree that the more you fast, the healthier you'll become. Obviously, that goes up to some limits. You can't fast for several weeks. But the more you fast in your life, the more gaps between eating, the greater your resilience of your body. So the lower your risk of cancer, heart disease, whatever. Now, how you fast is really up to you. Whether you want to just fast once a week, whether you want to have what I would consider a reasonable time of fasting by having 2 meals a day, one in the morning, one in the evening, where you have a fast during the day, and you have a fast overnight. That's up to you, whatever works for you. But it is good to incorporate a regime of fasting. It doesn't really matter how you do it, just so long as you do it.
Okay, and we have another question from Melanie. What about drinks that were sweetened with stevia or monk fruit?
So sugar is sugar, but not to the same degree. Stevia is about 60 to 70% the same calorific value of ordinary sugar. That's still a lot of sugar. Right? So if you want to reverse a disease or prevent a disease, you are going to have to get rid of all of those types of sugars and just have natural sugars in the end. So that is berries, fruits, all of those things, but natural. Okay, so just take the natural stuff and try and avoid the concentrated.
Okay, and I had some questions. The diabetes rate in Japan. I understand that the diabetes rate has increased now that McDonald's has arrived in Japan, or Western diet fast food. And are you aware of Dr. Neil Bernard's research linking diabetes with the consumption of meat products? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, there are a few routes to becoming insulin resistant. As I've said, high amounts of sugar. High amounts of sugar causes lots of insulin. You become insulin resistant. High amounts of fat, because fat doesn't actually need insulin to allow it to get into the cell. Fat goes straight into the cell, and then the cell becomes more insulin resistant because it doesn't need as much energy. The next thing is obviously things like steroids and stress. That increases your resistance. But yes, meat and certain amino acids present in meat, I think leucine is one of the biggest culprits, that programs your cells to become more insulin resistant. When I'm reversing people's diabetes, pretty much most of the time we are going to get them off of any kind of meat, especially in the first 4 weeks, and they have a much better result.
Okay. You mentioned cutting out white foods from your diet, such as white rice. But the question occurred to me when the diabetes rate in Japan was very low. Are they eating white rice? It looks like white rice, or does that just appear to be white rice and it's really whole grain? Do you have any information on that?
No, it's white rice. They're eating white rice. So here's the thing. So all cultures have their own difficulties and problems in their diet. But the thing is, if you're eating white rice, but everything else in your diet is good, fine, you get away with it. I mean, there are lots of people who eat exclusively white rice, but they never get diabetes. But for those of us who are going to be sensitive, and if you're eating white rice, not moving very much, eating lots of refined sugars, you're increasing your risk every time. Now, if the Japanese were eating whole grain rice, red rice, black rice, their rates of diabetes would be even lower. But yeah, the white rice is still a complication for them. You know, some they do that sticky white rice, which is a bit worse.
Are you aware of the research from Dr. Ornish that showed improvements in mild prostate cancer for patients that he placed on a plant-based diet? Yes. During a period of watchful waiting? You have any thoughts or comments about that?
Yeah, so that is the first, as I believe, that is the first experiment that actually showed reversal of cancerous cells just by a plant-based diet. Yeah, that was the first time it was shown. Since then, we've got some of the same material from some breast cancers. But here's the thing that we have to say. I can say almost categorically, with heart disease, blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, well, this is how you reverse it. Nobody can guarantee you that if you go onto that heavy plant-based diet, your cancer will reverse. Nobody can do that. because it's not quite as linear. So what we have to then do is say, yeah, as you said, be under the care of a physician and at least do watchful waiting. But if there is other intervention needed, you will have to do it, because we cannot possibly guarantee that by going on a certain diet regime, nobody can guarantee it, that you're going to definitely reverse your cancer. But you do increase your chances if you go that route.
Okay, Janine also asked about eating 6 small meals a day for diabetics versus 2 meals a day.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
The 6 meals a day is what some nutritionists would recommend. Certainly you'll find lots of fitness trainers recommending that, 6 small meals a day. But I'm going to tell you that that is not how to reverse diabetes. That is how to maintain you in a healthy state with diabetes. If you want to reverse type 2 diabetes, there needs to be good periods of fasting. Also, with the 6 meals a day, even though people can lose weight with it, 6 full meals, it's perfectly acceptable. It is not a natural state for your gut to be constantly having to digest food. It needs a rest period. So this is when we talk about health and health regimes, we have to remember we are trying to take a holistic approach. What we don't say is, let's do one thing that compromises another. What we want to do is something that will help every aspect of our body. And we know from all the research that we've seen is that 2 meals a day with a decent gap in between is the healthiest combination of meals, rather than having, grazing all through the day.
Okay, Victoria Bola Data Abanese is asking about, what about eating boiled eggs instead of meat?
Okay, well, just remember that nucleus of eggs, that yellow in the eggs, is the whole chicken just about to be developed. So it has all the cholesterol, all of the other stuff that you would try to avoid. If people want to eat eggs, they can. I mean, I don't recommend you eating more than one every 2 weeks, but it's high in cholesterol. Especially the yolk of the egg is very high in cholesterol. And for those people who are trying to combat heart disease, hypertension, they would need to try to avoid eggs.
There is a plant-based egg substitute called Just Eggs that is based on mung beans that can be seasoned, and that's another possibility. Victoria asked another question.
But I think, that's a good point, Doctor. But I always say, now I used to have a couple of restaurants, vegan restaurants in central London. And for me, it has, whatever it is, it has to be tasty, right? So some of the substitutes, I've got an egg substitute actually in my fridge today, which is pretty good. And it comes out like a very good scrambled egg. So you just have to know how to cook it well. If you're trying to convince your family to join you down this route, it's going to have to taste well, because they're not going to survive on a diet where they're all screwing up their faces all the time. It's got to taste nice.
Do you remember the name of your egg substitute that you like? Or would you prefer not to mention it?
No, I just can't remember it. I just can't remember it. I'd have to go downstairs. I can go downstairs.
Okay. All right. Victoria asked another question. It's similar to one we had earlier, but what do you think about equal, Splenda, sucrose, or honey?
Okay. I'd try and avoid all of them, but I mean, honey, if I was going to take something, it would be the natural one, honey, but I try and avoid all of them because they're all concentrated sugar. Now, if you are somebody with cancer, diabetes, anything like that, what you want to do is try and avoid any kind of concentrated sugar. As beautiful as honey is, and as natural as it is still concentrated sugar.
Okay, well, that about wraps up our questions, Dr. CHIDI. We appreciate you staying with us this late in the night. What time is it over there?
4 in the morning.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let's get you off into sleep, and we're going to close out with a word of prayer. Would you like to pray for us, please?
Father in heaven, we're grateful to you for bringing us together. Lord, we know that there are so many challenges going around the world right now. COVID-19 has really put a kind of plague throughout this world, and our response to it also is causing all sorts of issues. So, Lord, we're asking for you to be with all of us. Help us understand that, our bodies are created by you, and if we look after them, they will look after us. Lord, we want to ask you to bless all those here with us today, viewing, bless their families, bless the community, and we're asking to bless the world at large. And may we be part of that blessing as we help them. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Chidi. We appreciate you giving us knowledge about controlling some of the chronic diseases that we face. And in controlling that, we thereby help to lower our risk for COVID-19 infections developing in the first place, or at least having a less severe case if we do come down with it by controlling some of these diseases and risk factors. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with us and your time.
My pleasure. Good to be with you. I hope to meet you all someday soon.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we wish you a good night. We look to see you on our Sabbath School and Church program coming up this Sabbath morning by the same means that you're watching the program now. Thank you very much. Good night.